So I picked up the Stage 2 kit for the Coleman 200U-EX, the 196cc Minibike. I got this from OMB Motorsports. Comes with a header pipe, muffler, a new intake cone filter. Separately, I got breather filters that they had, a non-EPA Honda carb with a, I believe it's a .037 or .37 main jet. Separately, also just got a billet aluminum oil plug. It comes with the intake filter adapter. That one is just a flat face. Separately, they also have this velocity stack style intake. They sell it under the Honda, I believe it's the Honda 212, but they look like they have the same bolt pattern and same fit, so we'll see if that works. Comes with a spark plug and two 18-pound springs, and also the required exhaust gaskets, throttle body gasket, and zip ties, and what is this, the carb selection lever. So let's get this on and see how it performs. Let's start by removing the air cleaner. And screw that little thumb screw. Wing nut on the top of the air filter. Pull the filter off. And there's a couple of Phillips heads in there. Two Phillips came right off. We're going to end up having to pull some linkage off in the back there. So now we're going to take the bolts off with the carburetor. These bolts go all the way through for the air filter and the carb. Move these out of the way. There we go. It's for the air filter. And I have a nut I have to find. As you can see, the entire carburetor is going to come off just from those two 10mm nuts that we had on there. Take this gasket off. So we'll have to disconnect the fuel line. I find it helpful to use a small set of vice grips to pinch it. I've seen people plug it up with screws. Or if you drain the gas earlier, it's not going to matter. In this case, I still have gas in there, so I'll pinch it off. Need those pliers for the clamp. Slide it up. As you can see, that's pinching the fuel off. Nothing ran out. Hopefully that stays. Spark plug wire, just lift it up and out of the way. And now we have linkage. Now we'll disconnect the linkage, rotate this butterfly valve forward, pull it up, and the smaller one should be able to Maybe fish out with your fingers. Snap. There we go. It should slide off. Make sure you're not bound up at the gasket or on this bracket. Feeling the bracket will be in the way, I'm just going to bend it up slightly, get it out of the way, and there we go. That'll bend back. On the left side of the bike, we're going to disconnect the exhaust header. It's two 13mm bolts, nuts actually. Should break free pretty easily. It's pretty easy. There we go. Just those two nuts and it's off. So with the 18-pound springs that came with the kit, I think with the intake and the exhaust off, should be easy to get to those springs without having to pull the motor out. Next, I'll disconnect spark plug wire. This plug has an odd approach angle. I couldn't get a standard plug socket on it, so this might be a little bit big, but it broke free with a 21mm. Standard wrench. Once it breaks free, you can just use your fingers. I'm not going to pull it out all the way until I'm ready for the next step of the spring replacement, because I don't want anything to get inside of the combustion chamber. I'm going to pull off the valve cover. It's a 5/16 nuts. By 16 bolts, actually. These gear wrenches are great. I don't have a set. Yep, a set. They're fairly cheap now. On this one, the cover should come right off. So removing these valve springs, you can get a better angle. So removing these valve springs, we're going to remove this top nut, the tensioning nut, and then, or retaining nut, and then the second nut down here, which holds the rockers on both sides. And then we should be able to slip these off, but first we have to make sure that the valves don't drop inside of the cylinder. Okay, so we're going to replace the valve springs. I tried to pressurize the cylinder with my air compressor and a leak down tester, but the issue I had with, even at top dead center, would push the piston back down and rotate the engine. I couldn't find a good solution for holding the crank in place, so I'm going to use the rope method. And might have seen other videos, but essentially I take 1/4 inch nylon rope, feed it through the spark plug hole. And what you want to do is get as much in there as possible, fill up the combustion chamber, and that should prevent the valves from falling down. Just keep feeding it in. I'm actually surprised at how much rope is going in. Get it all the way in there. I think that's about it. Yeah, that should be about all it'll take. So you want the engine to be in top dead center, and the easiest way to tell that, so we have the cover off, and you'll rotate the pull cord slowly until both of these are completely loose and there's no tension on the spring. And from there, we'll disconnect these retaining nuts. They are 10 millimeter. Break them off. I'm going to undo these. You're going to want to store these somewhere safe. And one thing that I always do is you keep everything as a matching set. So that when you assemble it, everything that wears together stays together. It looks like the exhaust valve has a cap. I'll just use a magnet to pull that off. I'll set that with the exhaust components. And then from there, you'll see there's a little notch on each spring retainer that you just push down and slide it back. Comes off just like that. Again, keep all the components together. I'm not going to use the spring again, but that spring retainer will stay with the exhaust side. Same thing with the intake. Push down, slide back, and then pop right off. We have the new 18-pound springs. They're the original. Squeezes pretty easy. And then the 18-pound spring takes much more effort, easy, and harder. And then installation is reverse of removal. Gotta push down and slide it over. This will just be a tiny bit harder to push down. That might have moved just slightly. If you don't get it the first time, just try again. There we go. Again, stiffer than the stock ones. Just to show you the retainer. Again, it has that center hole and a little hole to the side. When you're pushing these down, aim for that side hole and then slide it onto the center hole. And there we go. Intake's on. Exhaust is on. When you're reassembling the rockers, you'll notice that One has a bulbed end, one has an indent. The indent goes over the rod, so the indent will go down. And for now, I'm just going to lightly tighten these on, but the valve lash is going to have to be adjusted on both of these. Just make sure everything's aligned. And I don't know if you noticed my mistake, but I'm going to correct it right now. There's a cap that goes on the exhaust spring. Let's go ahead and put that back on. There we go. And now we can put the exhaust side back together. And make sure you put it on correctly. Indent down on the rod. There we go. Put the retaining caps back on. At this point we can pull our rope out. And the next part is going to be adjusting the lash before I put the valve cover back on. Alright, we have all the hardware back on our valve train. We have to adjust the lash for the intake and exhaust valve still. I'll show you how to do that. You're going to need a set of feeler gauges. Any auto store has them, pretty cheap, a couple bucks. 14 millimeter for the main nut and a 10 millimeter for the retaining nut. On the exhaust side, it's a 0.15 millimeter to 0.20 millimeter. So we'll go with a 0.178 right in the middle. You want your feeler gauge to slide in nicely, not too tight. And then you'll use the larger nut to adjust. You can do it by hand. You'll use a larger nut to adjust. Tighten it to close the gap. So I tightened it just a little too much. You want it to slide in just nicely. Once you got it where you want it, go ahead and hold the larger nut. And then tighten up the retaining nut, trying not to move the larger one. This might take a couple of attempts. Just keep playing around with it until you get it right. See, like now it's too tight. I'll have to readjust these. It'll usually tighten up as you tighten up the retaining nut. So we're in there again.
Tighten it down again. There we go, it's still moving. It slides right in there. Do the same thing for the intake, but the intake side is a 0.10 to a 0.15 millimeter, so we're going to use a 0.127. So it slides right in there. And then we'll do it again, just tighten it down, and then check and adjust as needed. Again, a little too tight. Just keep making adjustments until you get it right. There we go, slides right in. Now we'll put the valve cover back on. We're putting the valve cover back on. Said before I was using a 5/8 ratchet to take these off. I think that's the same thing as an 8 millimeter. If you only have a metric set. Fighting me? This piece of gasket might be in the way. Got it. Just gonna tighten these up. Not too tight at all. Remember, you're just going into aluminum on the other side. And they're small bolts. If you crank it, you'll strip it. Just nice and snug. Put the new spark plug in that came with the kit. It uses, honestly, an electrode I've never seen before. Doesn't look gappable. But go ahead and put that in. So I paused. I want to put a little dab of anti-seize on the threads. So just a little bit to avoid any corrosion later. This spark plug takes a different socket size than the stock one did. This one's very small. About 5/8. So 5/8 spark plug socket. Again, you don't want to tighten it too hard. It's just a small aluminum head. Definitely don't want to strip them. Spark plug wire back on. Next, I'm going to cut off this throttle stud screw. That restricts how far open you can open the throttle, which actually limits the top speed. I've seen that I can go from 19 to about 25 miles per hour just by letting it open more. And now that we have the heavier valve springs, it should protect the engine from any excess RPMs. So on the newer models, if you can see, they've welded the screw so you can't back it out. So what I'm going to do is I'll just cut off the end of it. I've seen people use metal blades on saws, well, on a hacksaw or a pole saw, but I have a rotary cutter, like a Dremel, and I'm going to use that. I'm going to be careful not to cut anything else around it. Obviously use safety goggles. And there we go, it's off. If you can see, the throttle can open much farther now. The new throttle stop is actually the full compression of the spring on the cable. So it still has a stop built in. Since we're on the exhaust side, we're going to go ahead and put the new header and muffler on. New gasket it came with. Put that on. Oop. Just align it with that port. Snap a little bit. There we go. Yeah, there we go. 13mm time up. Proximity of the pipe makes that hard. Makes it rich. And there we go. And the muffler is simply screws on here. I'm going to throw in a little bit of anti-seize on that again. Components, especially the exhaust ones, I want to try to prevent rusting or seizure because of rusting. Just right on the tips of the threads a little bit. Hoping that barcode is facing down when I'm done tightening it, otherwise I'll peel it off. And of course it doesn't. That's okay. I'll just peel that off later. There is. So here we have the old carb, the new carb that came in the kit. This is a non-EPA carb. Inside of the bowl of this carb, the main jet has a tamper-proof, if we can see, it's got a tamper-proof screw end on it. It only turns in one direction, and we could either drill that out, but the kit came with the new carb that we'll put the new jet into. The one thing I do want from this old carb is this plate, because it has the on-off labeling. And call me dumb, but I like that. Anything with a 50-50 chance, I always tend to select the wrong thing. So instead of this blank plate on the new one, I'm going to transfer this plate over. So let's get started. We're going to put the new jet
It's a 10 millimeter. I had loosened it already. We'll put the new main jet into here, but we got to take out the old one first. It does not come pre-installed. It's the old jet. Leave the emulsion tube in there. Set that down for a second. Kit comes with a jet. It's labeled GX390. I had to look up through the site to figure out what size it was. It's a .037. We're just going to put that in there. Be careful not to cross thread anything. There we go, it's the new jet installed. Make sure our O-ring's good. Double check the orientation. So the drain just goes there. There we go, we got the new main jet in. And we're going to take these plates off because I want this old one. I'm going to keep this old carb because I've got a generator out back that's not running that well, and I think it actually has the same clone engine as that one. It's a Ryobi 212, but I believe it uses the same carbs. Nice and snug. Last piece that came with the kit was a new choke selector. Just pop that on. Make sure it goes into that slot. There you go. And this is ready to get put back on. All right, we're putting the new carb on. Slide it on the rail, but we have to connect our fuel and our two linkages. I still have this line pinched, closed. I'll slide it on and take that off. There we go. Make sure that's all fully seated down. There we go. It's all the way down. Slide that linkage in the back there, and we have our throttle return spring. Goes in the small hole next to it, just like that. choke, fuel. Remember from before, I bent that up slightly. I'm just bending it back down. Let's not forget our gasket. Slide that on. Next we have the adapter for the air filter. This is not the one that came in the Stage 2 kit, but they also sell Velocity Stack style. I'm going to try it out. It's a little bit bigger, but it should fit fine. It's got this bracket for the choke, and that's going to go like this on this little screw hole. So on this bolt I'm going to put a little bit of blue thread locker just to prevent it from rattling off. So I got a little blue thread locker on it. The bracket goes like this. Just using an Allen to thread it in. The thread locker is just to prevent the vibrations from rattling it out. I'll tighten that up once I have it on. So we'll slide this on, and this goes over the choke. It's supposed to hold the choke on, otherwise it just pops off. Snug up this bolt in the back. There we go. It's tightened on. And that'll prevent that from coming off, and you can still adjust the choke. I'll put the two nuts back on. To tighten the bolts, you're going to need a deep 10 millimeter. The adapter that comes with the kit is flat faced, so it won't be an issue. Actually, I'm getting away with not a deep 10. Once again, you don't want to crank down too hard on these. Just get everything snug. And that should be good. Just to double check the choke, that's not going to fall off. Moves nicely. Now we'll just place the filter on, angled towards the back. Tighten down the clamp. on there nice and snug. Doesn't seem to affect the movement of the choke or fuel selector. And the one last thing we got to do is we're going to put a little filter on this valve cover breather. And the last thing I got to do, these little breather filters, they also sell them. It didn't come in the kit, but you want to put one of these on the end of your crankcase breather. My tube came out, and yours probably come out too when you take the air box out, but slides right back in. Slide it right back in. And you can use another zip tie to secure this out of the way. Just going to use another zip tie and secure it to this bracket. I don't want it falling off. There we go.